Hello, my name is Dan Hennen. Today is November 7th, 2019, and this episode is called Crowley Case Updates, Getting a Visual. Tonight's episode is going to bring closure to about a half a dozen topics on the David Crowley case. And I've been jotting down some notes, and I think it's best, some people learn better with the visual rather than going through tons of forensic reports, lab reports, crime scene photos, and things like that that they're presented with, and then to actually see it in laid out physically. And so what I've done today is set up a couple of couches near a wall to make it look like the Crowley living room wall, because I want to start off first by talking about the blood writing on the wall and show you where there's inconsistencies with this story. Now here's a picture of the wall in the Crowley home with a sectional sofa in front of it. The question is, who did the writing and how did they do the writing? According to the official theory, David Crowley did the writing in Komel's blood using his hands. Now the question, the discrepancy with that is this. There were no fingerprints found of anyone's blood, no bloody fingerprints on that wall. Markings were done. Markings were done on the wall. Someone obviously performed writing the phrase Allahu Akbar on that wall. But if you use your fingerprints to write the letters, the actual fingers would leave fingerprints behind, which would be able to be identified as to who the culprit was, to actually who did the writing. So there's speculation if someone used gloves. There's speculation if David's right hand was missing at the scene, if his hand was perhaps cut off and his hand was used to do or perform the writing. And so here's what we got, some of the problems with some of this story here from the official narrative. The first question that many people ask is, there should be tons of blood dripped onto that cloth sofa from doing the writing and going back and forth from the body to do the writing. And so I'm going to do the experiment here today just to give you a visual of what that would look like for whoever did this job. So here is a sofa and a wall. Allegedly, the person would have had to get up here and write Allahu Akbar on the wall with their, I'm not saying right or left hand, I'm just saying whichever hand they used to write it, they had to get onto the sofa and write it. Now the body of Komel, because we know it was her blood. That's been proven. Whoever used it was her blood. And she was found right in a corner, snug up against the corner of the sofa with her hands crossed underneath her. And so Komel was lying basically like this. So that presents the other story, which we'll get into later. Remember, hands crossed underneath, both hands missing, laying underneath, and the dog ate them both off was the official narrative. The dog ate both hands off, while at the same time hands were crossed, snug up against the corner. There's no way the dog could even get in there to perform that on one of those hands, much less the other one. So the body's laying there. Here's what we've got. If David was reaching down to get blood to then do writing, he would have to come back down and get some more and write, get some more, and finish the writing. What the speculation is, which is probably the case, is that something was used to contain the blood, so the person only had to dip in to do the writing. I'm just using a simple plastic bowl. Now, you go up there one time and you're not going back and forth. The problem is, if something like this was used, we've got two problems. Number one, where is it? It was not found at the scene. There was no bowl found at the scene. There was no bloody bowl found at the scene. And if they rinsed it out down some drain, there was no blood in the sinks. If something like this was used, someone has it today, or it's been disposed of. Nothing in the crime scene photos show anything like this. If David Crowley did it, he would have set it right there below him and ended his life. But there's no bowl. Now the other question is, how would Komel's blood get into the bowl? How would the blood be drained from her body into something like this to get it easy to apply on that wall? So I'm leaving it up to the listeners here to do that. The other question is, there's no fingerprints on that wall. Speculation in the justice group is that more than likely the perpetrator used a pair of gloves to do the writing on the wall, because there's no fingerprints on that wall. The question is, and this is what we want the Justice Page members and those watching videos like this to keep in mind, to be able to use their critical thinking. Remember, there's no fingerprints. A naked finger would have left fingerprints behind. There was none. More than likely, it's safe to assume gloves were used, latex gloves, rubber gloves, something. But they were not found at the scene. No gloves found. And they obviously weren't in the trash. Photographs of each of the trash were taken by police technicians. So there's gloves out there somewhere, either disposed of or sitting out there to this day, that someone's got it, potentially as a trophy. So we've got two issues with that whole scenario. Now, David Crowley, if his hand was cut off, he was missing his right hand. Only photo left was his left hand, which was in a mummified state, almost as if it was tied or under restraints for some time to cause it to mummify faster than the rest of his body. Right hand was missing. Was it cut off? Was it used by the perpetrators to paint on the wall? Well, the answer to that is also no. His hand, whether if it was attached to his body or not, would leave fingerprints. Fingerprints would be left behind on that wall for detectives to go into, test, and pull fingerprints off of that wall. Now, did David Crowley, or the perpetrator, put a glove on David Crowley's right hand that's missing and perform the writing? Maybe so. I think that if the perpetrators went so far to use his hand to blame it, the blood writing, to show evidence, they would not put a glove on it. Fingerprints would be all over. The detectives would match the fingerprints to David, and obviously you've got your killer because the fingerprints traced it. So the odds of someone putting a glove on a cut-off hand to dip it in blood to do writing is possible but not probable. So the question is, we've got a bowl, some kind of container, a pail, something that the perpetrator or perpetrators use to dip in to write. Now, what detectives did find, this is how they narrowed it down when reading the police report, you've got to be able to censor out what they're telling you versus what they are also trying to conceal to you. Evidence proved that David's DNA was on that wall. David Crowley's DNA. The DNA is fingerprint, finger touch, skin cells, not in the blood, but on that wall. Now, a typical homeowner is going to use a hammer and hang up a clock, a picture frame, something on the wall. Now, there's nothing on that wall except a clock. David owned the home. David lived in the home for a year. Your fingerprints, not your fingerprints, but touch DNA is going to be on that wall, for instance. David Crowley, reading a bedtime story, book to Ranny, DNA everywhere, right here. So what they did, and what it's up for the user to decipher, is of course David's DNA is going to be on that wall. Touch DNA, skin cells. Police report never ever said that his blood DNA was on that wall. There was blood on the wall, which is Komel's. They assumed it was David who did it. That's the part that's up for conjecture. So there's issues with the whole blood writing on that wall. And I'll go back to that wall once again. As you can see, there's a clock up there. There's nothing else on the wall. But by the nature of the beast, David is a homeowner. His DNA, his touch DNA, or his fingerprints would stand to reason to be on that wall regardless. But we can't assume that that was part of the crime. That's what they did to link it, though, the blood on the wall. Now, we also have the most blood-filled item in that living room where the crime scene was. Keep in mind that there was not a lot of blood there. The bodies were there. Little bits of blood was there. Lots of hair all over the place. But only the one spot in that living room where there was blood soaked in on the furniture, was on a recliner. And here's what that would look like. For instance, the edge of the recliner was the bottom portion down by the floor. This was soaked straight through with blood. Keep in mind, Komel was over here, Ranny was over there, and David was farther away yet. There was no body here. And this is just, once again, this is just the couch, but where the recliner was, there was no body. So the question there, no body, it looked, the blood-soaked furniture, that recliner cushion, I would assume, someone else can point me out if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that's where someone's head was at one point after being shot and blood was pouring out and soaking into that cushion. The crime scene showed that no body was there, but obviously body was there at one point, unless the recliner was moved or a person was moved. What we know, or what it's alleged, is that none of the bodies were moved. So that we can rule out right away. Someone's body was there on that crime scene photo at one point. The blood just wouldn't get there by itself. Very unlikely that the recliner was moved. But someone's head was up against that recliner at some point. Now the question is, who moved the bodies and why? There's some speculation that police did it after they arrived at the scene. There's some speculation that the killers did it. And there is some speculation that David Crowley did it before he killed his family. For some reason, staging the scene, moving things around. The fact of the matter is, someone's body was up next to that recliner. but we don't see any information in the detective reports, no further research on whose it was, no testing of the blood to determine whose blood it even was. And so these are the things we want you to look for. Use your brain, use critical thinking when you go through these reports, these lab tests reports. I know it seems intimidating to go through hundreds of pages of lab and forensic reports, but just look for the easy things like that. Someone's head was obviously against that cushion on the recliner, but when? Police arrived at the scene, allegedly, and no one was there. The bodies were already laid out. So the scene was staged to some extent. We already know that. So those are the types of things to look for. Hair is the next question. There was hair all over the place. Long, black hair. Oh, that would be Komel or Ranya's hair. And so people ask that are new to the case, why is there so much hair? What happened to the hair? Why is there hair everywhere? Good question, but that's not the important question. The important question is, how was the hair removed? There was a knife at the scene. There could have been a scissors used, but regardless if it's a knife or a scissors and the hair was cut off, the ends of those hairs, the individual hairs, would have a straight snip as if they were cut. If there was a struggle and hair was yanked out from the scalp, yanked out, pulled out, something to that effect, or even due to a normal cause of decomposition over months or weeks, naturally would have fallen out of the hair. That's not going to have a clean slice. Only a scissors or knife would have a clean slice when looked at under a microscope. The other hair, if yanked out, would still show the follicles attached to the skin. There'd be a little bulb at the end. It would not be a slice. That's the question. Was testing done on that? No. There was no testing done on the hair. There's hair all over the place. The first question is, was it yanked out, pulled out, or cut off? How it got there, I don't think matters. Why it's there, I don't think it matters. It's all part of staging the scene. But the question we need to ask is, where the hair pieces have the follicles attached, as if they were yanked in clumps, or were they cut? Now we know a dog was left at the scene, Paleo, the family dog. The dog could have yanked with the dog's teeth and possibly pulled it off, possibly. But with the dog being there, the dog certainly wouldn't, there would be no straight edge snipping, unless of course Paleo got the scissors out or the knife. So we've got to think of things in that context, in that stage. We know the scene was staged. We know evidence proves that David didn't do this. We're not fighting that battle anymore. We already know that David Crowley did not do this because he couldn't have done this. Now, folks new to the case usually come from after watching that documentary by Eric Nelson. And they come over and join the page and say, you know what? David had mental illness. David had depression. David had PTSD. There was paranormal activity in the home. There was drugs involved. There was alcohol involved. There was hallucinogens involved. For those people that say any of those, that long list of excuses or reasons, those may all be true. Every one of those could be true from a factual standpoint. That did not cause the death of these three individuals. And remember now, the death of these three, David, Komel, and Rania. Here's a Christmas photo from 2 years before the deaths. Now they want you to believe that these things happened, and they'll lead you down the rabbit hole of searching on a never-ending goose chase as if, did David drink? Did he use drugs? Was there hallucinogens? That's got nothing to do with anything in this case. The bullet that went through David's head, allegedly found in the attic, didn't have blood, tissue, or brain matter on it. Just had his touch DNA, like he handled it. He would have handled each bullet when loading the magazine. So all of his bullets would have his touch DNA on it. So police cannot conclude, without having the bullet that killed the man, that he did it. And also keep in mind, a side note, no fingerprints found on the gun. So someone wiped down the gun, someone planted or staged a bullet hole in the ceiling that has nothing to do with anything. And so these are all forms of distraction to keep people focused on other things instead of focusing on the real deal. So we got the hair issue, we've got the body issue of Komel in the corner, hands missing underneath her, blamed on the dog eating them. Bullet in the attic wasn't found until the next month. February of 2015, the bullet in the attic was found. It's known as the infamous item number 57. It was fired. It was found in the attic. I don't know where it was fired, but it came from that gun, and it had touch DNA on it only. So there's a hole in the ceiling that Chris Klein tells police about a month afterwards. Police come, look at the ceiling when they come into the entranceway. Remember now, mind you, this is in the living room where the entire crime scene took place. They said police must have missed it. They must have missed the crime, the bullet hole in the ceiling. The most important bullet in the crime, when placing the blame on David Crowley, is that bullet number 57. Police didn't even have it for a month later. Then they find it in the attic. This is after a 911 call came out on January 19th, saying there's suspicious activity in the home. Chris Klein was in the house with a handful of other folks. Remember, the 19th. We know from the police reports that the professional biohazard cleaners were in the house on January 20th. So the question is, they found a bullet fragment that came out of the rug in the living room on the 20th of January, 3 days later. The 911 call for suspicious activity came on the 19th. These folks were in the house. Now the question is, was that bullet hole there on the 17th when investigators, crime scene technicians, the medical examiner was on site, the officers, the detectives, there must have been 20 people in that house. And the Gray State guys are claiming, Gray State guys, the alleged friends of David Crowley, are claiming that police and everyone in that house must have simply missed that bullet hole in the ceiling. Now, with the bullet hole, as with anything else, investigators would have taken a photograph here, 3 or 4 different variations of a hole in the ceiling, zoomed in, backwards, what level of details. There would have been multiple photos of a bullet hole. There was no photos of the bullet hole on January 17th when police got there. Now, police, I think, in the process right now with Detective James Gummert, the lead detective, is answering a question from Greg Fernandez, because Gummert does think that in one of the photos, or some of the photos, that detectives did show that they did take photographs of that bullet hole, meaning that they were aware of it. Remember now, the Upper Valley Police Department, they're in a corner, been backed into a corner here. If they weren't aware of it and it was there, they're going to look really bad by missing something so obvious. If it was planted later and it legitimately wasn't there on January 17th when detectives got there, then they just find themselves getting duped again by the perpetrators, whoever made the hole there a couple days later, which is the Gray State team and David Crowley's brother and potentially his father. They were in the house on the 19th. This is their own statements. This is not me making it up. This is per the police reports and per the testimony given to detectives. They were in that house on January 19th. Now, what were they doing? I don't know. Officially, they were helping organize some things for the family and help getting things ready for the funeral and memorial service. But you have to ask yourself the question. What was so urgent to get into that house to start preparing for the memorial service and start getting things arranged on the 19th of January after a triple homicide took place at that very location 2 days earlier? Keep in mind, the cleaners weren't there. They may have been there already, but they weren't done because they still came back and were cleaning on the 20th of January. So I think the cleaners wrapped up on either the 20th, 21st, 20 seconds, sometime in that time frame, the cleaners professionally cleaned the house and then opened it up to the public or to the family. But while cleaners are in the house, no one's supposed to be in that house doing anything. And that's a key point to remember. If the cleaners are in that house after the police open it up to the cleaners to clean, there still should be no one coming through that house, much less 5 or 6 guys helping organize things for the family's memorial service. So now you have to ask yourself the next question: why was there such an urgent need to get into that house? Well, mistakes were made in the staging of this crime. The perpetrators realized that it wasn't a nice, tidy crime scene. There was no bullet that killed David Crowley. There was no bullet. He died of a suicide. They knew that when the autopsy took place and they didn't find the bullet in the head, they didn't find it laying at the scene, and they didn't find it in a wall or a ceiling, it had to have been in that house. There was no bullet. The bullet wasn't there. Police didn't find the bullet. So there comes a need now, a requirement for the perpetrators to get back into the house to plant that evidence so everything ties out. Now, the detectives are already duped once. They wrapped up this whole crime scene on the 17th, kind of put the finishing touches on it the 18th, and I think by that 18th or 19th day, the press releases were already going out as they were treating it as a double homicide followed by a suicide by David Crowley, a crazed lunatic from the alt-right, which is not true. I created the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook page on January 19th, that morning, when things already didn't make sense to me, and I lived 30 minutes away. So I had set up the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook group before the bullet was even there, before the cleaners were done, and before that 911 phone call came in from a neighbor saying there's suspicious activity going on in the house that doesn't relate to the cleaners. There's a GMC pickup truck there, which turned out to be Chris Klein's. Klein says he got in the house because he got permission from Dan Crowley Sr., that's David Crowley's father, who lives 45 minutes away. Dan Crowley Sr. tells police that he was never in the house with Chris Klein. But Dan Crowley Jr. was in the house, along with, I think it was Adam Shambor, Danny August Mason, and Mason Hendricks. There was a handful of guys in that house on the 19th. So the question now comes down to, why aren't police focusing on those guys in the house before the cleaning was done? But they're too busy trying to find photos of a bullet to avoid themselves from looking bad from missing it. When I don't think that bullet hole was there till the 19th. They came in there on the 19th, my opinion, fired the round into the ceiling, left the attic, gone bullet roll around up in the attic, let the police find it when they came on in February, and said, here's the missing bullet, this is the thing that ties it all together, David did it. So now we're getting into he said, she said, official story, distraction story, misinfo, disinfo, and then we've got shills and trolls hitting the justice page, keeping everyone off track on purpose. So keep an eye out for those types of things and that type of behavior and that type of storyline, because it's all done on purpose. Everyone here is playing a role, the bad guys, the perpetrators. They're playing a role. The cast of characters each have a role, and they're playing it. And some are playing it very, very well. So once you see through that charade and see what's really going on and ask the real questions, you'll know. Was Apple Valley Police actually covering it up? Or were they trying to avoid having a black eye after treating this case so horrendously? Or what's worse yet, are they actually in on the cover-up? Either way, it's a lose-lose situation. So we got the blood, we got the sealing. So now the question with the sealing is something that hasn't been done yet. We need some help from the members of the Justice page. We need a volunteer to do a test experiment for us. Because the bullet hole in the ceiling, we want to find out if that bullet hole was fired directly into the ceiling, or if it potentially went through someone's head and then subsequently through the ceiling. The easy key for this is the nice little fact that David Crowley allegedly used hollow point bullets in his .40 caliber Springfield handgun. Hollow point bullets, for those new to this case, are something that gang members use. They're used for killing, not hurting, not injuring, but killing things. It's not just a slug that flies through and hits you like a small round caliber small round that can come in and out of the body, and you could live through it. This is a .40 caliber, large caliber, and a hollow point, which means that once it strikes the object, it mushrooms out and spins through, mushrooming out into the sharp edge coming out and spinning through, grabbing everything in its wake. Skin, brain matter, tissue, blood. It leaves a small hole opening if you were to shoot yourself in the head, and a much larger hole coming out. Now, David's head was not there, so we couldn't tell how small the opening was in relation to how big the exit wound was. But we do know that hollow point bullets were used. If David did what the official narrative said, was shot himself with his left hand through his right temple, head down, shot up, bullet goes through the ceiling, that is plausible. Not probable. That's why we get the whole, remember the Gray State guys were saying that David was on his knees, killed himself on his knees after performing some kind of ritual ceremony deal. He must have been on his knees looking down. The key word these guys keep saying is that David was looking down when he shot himself. That's the only explanation for the bullet to get into the ceiling. That's another mistake that these individuals made. Bullets in the ceiling. The trajectory of the bullet needs to come from somewhere very low to go very high at that angle. The next question for police is, was trajectory testing done in that bullet hole? In the ceiling bullet hole, was a trajectory test done? And there's two ways to do it. There's a long, straight, firm rods that you can stick in at that angle to see where the shooting took place, or you can use a string to see what angle it entered that ceiling is versus where it came from. That should, in that room, identify exactly where that shot took place. Doesn't matter who fired it, what weapon it was, they'll know where that shot originated from. And right now, they can't get it down to that low from someone on the ground in a kneeling position shooting himself this way. Now, David is right-handed. Right hand was missing. The gun was found near the left hand, which means the perpetrators, whoever staged the scene, wanted us to believe that David used his left hand, shot himself through the right temple, up here. Another mistake is they laid the gun next to his left hand, within inches of his left hand. David wasn't left-handed, never fired a gun from his left hand ever. The problem is, his entrance wound was somewhere on the right side of the head because the exit wound was back on the left side. So what we need someone to do, because what I'm getting at is the hollow point, when it hits the first thing it hits, it mushrooms out. If that weapon was fired by someone staging the scene just to shoot the hole up there and it didn't go through anything, it's going to be a very small a hole. I'm not sure how many millimeters big into that ceiling. If it went through David's head, or anything else for that matter, it'd be a much larger hole into that ceiling, because it had to go through something first, explode out, mushroom, and then go up through that ceiling sheetrock into the attic. So here's what I'm asking our members to do. Those of you who have a registered weapon and have access to a .40 caliber handgun and have access to a firing range is get 6 rounds of 40 hollow point .40 caliber bullets. Go to a range with a large section of sheetrock, and I would say fire 3 shots in it, different angles, high, low, left to right, and just measure the width of that hole that hasn't gone through anything, that hasn't impacted anything except just the sheetrock. And then measure those 3 holes, add them up, divide by 3, get an average of what a hole, ballpark figure of what a hole would look like that has been impacted by a bullet that has not yet mushroomed. Then go to your favorite grocery store and buy 3 coconuts, set them up on a table, and put the sheetrock behind it, and fire 3 more shots, 1 through each coconut. Coconut resembles something similar to a human head. When something strikes the coconut and then subsequently goes through that sheetrock, measure the distance then of that mushroomed bullet on the back end. After it went through the coconut, through the sheetrock, you're going to have a higher, bigger, larger hole, in other words. Measure those in centimeters, let's say. Add them up, divide by 3, get an average. Then you'll have an average of a projectile that hasn't gone through anything first, and a projectile width that has already mushroomed. Here we go. I draw it up for you. Get an idea of, just do a simple test like that with 6 bullets. Use a ruler. Pause this if you need to. I wrote the instructions on the bottom. Get a ruler, measure it, and then we'll get the difference of that size of a straight projectile or one that's already been mushroomed. And then we can match it up with the crime scene photos that the Apple Valley Police took in February of 2015 of the width of that hole. That hole, if it's the size of a mushroomed bullet, means it went through something, and more than likely it was David or somebody. If it is a small size of the small hole that didn't impact anything, the police don't have a story then whatsoever. That means it didn't go through David's head or hit anything else. It was directly fired into the sheetrock from someone in that living room, just to make it look good. And we can get the measurements then from the police photos of the actual hole in that ceiling. And so if we can get the volunteers' help from something to that effect to do a test study, that'd be greatly appreciated, because that's really the diameter in centimeters of a hole mushroomed. It's going to be one or the other. That the police have either one or the other. It's going to be the big one or the small one. It can't be somewhere in between. It either had to go through something or somebody, or someone came in there, I think, on the 19th and fired a shot and then said, hey, cops, you forgot it. Look what you missed. And keep in mind that also. When we hear about people at a scene going back and asking detectives to research something that they missed the first time around, you have to ask yourselves the question, how did they know it was missed? How did they know it was missed? They were screaming, missed, missed, missed. A good detective should have said, how do you know we missed it? Now, when the family came after the cleaners were done to go in that house, speculation was, the section of the blood writing was painted in white. Someone painted over that section of the wall in white so people wouldn't have to see the Allahu Akbar. The question is, who painted it white? Did police order someone to paint it? Not their job. I doubt that happened. Did they order the cleaning crew to paint it? I could also use some help here from those listening in on the show. I don't know what cleaning crews do. I believe it's their job to clean up something, not to repaint or paint anything at all in the site of a homicide. Did they go run to the store and buy some white paint and paint it up per police direction? I would consider that odd. The question is, who painted it and why? Who gave the direction, I guess, is the better question. Who directed someone to paint over that writing? Now, it could have came from the family too. It could have come from the Alam family, the Crowley family, to say, you know what, we don't want to get into that whole Allahu Akbar Muslim slant. How about you paint that, get rid of it. We don't want to see it. We don't even want it making the news. That could be the case too. Now, when it comes up to the Muslim Islamic slant, whether this was a hit, someone angry about converting a hit job, an extremist hit job, we always keep these angles going because we see the Quran on the floor, we see the submit to Allah now, and we see Allahu Akbar written on the wall. Whoever staged the scene was hell-bent on focusing on this whole Islamic Muslim angle. But remember, you have to ask yourself, the people staging this crime scene, not too bright. Komel graduated from Baylor University in Texas, near where she grew up, or where they were living. She went to four-year school, four-year college, Baylor. Baylor is a private Christian university. Christian. Private Christian university. She was there before they even had gotten married, had a baby, anything else. So I don't believe the Alam family was too against the Christian ideologies. They sent their daughter to a Christian college. So once again, the whole Muslim Islamic angle is slanted. It's to get you to look into something that's not there. It's overstaging the scene. One of the biggest mistakes. I don't know if she converted before or after the wedding. If she converted at all, I personally don't care if she converted. This wasn't a Muslim Islamic hate crime anyway, because she had already gotten her master's degree from the University of Minnesota. So years earlier, when she went to Baylor Christian private university, always do your homework first. Always do your research. Because it's the little things like this. This is something that a detective from Apple Valley could have come up with and said, I can't believe this is an Islamic hate crime or something because she married a Christian. She spent 4 years at a Christian university that obviously her parents allowed her to go through and helped possibly fund her way to go there. Regardless, they blessed her okay to go there. So that's a sidetrack. It's all it is to sidetrack, and it's all distraction. And it's the little things is how these folks are running up to problems here with their poor staging of the crime scene. Now, the last thing before I let you go tonight is we know one of the perpetrators. I can't say perpetrators. One of the Gray State friends, David Crowley's alleged best friend, is Sean Wright. Now, Sean Wright is this gentleman right here. Sean Wright was very active in the Gray State Project, very active in the documentary. He's the one that told David Crowley on Facebook, please don't push this stuff out there in the documentary. I can go to prison for this. The tax stuff. And he went on to say, by the way, call me, and left a cell phone number. And this cell phone number was left on a Facebook post. Not an instant message, not a private messenger. He left it on his comment saying, please call me. So you have to ask yourself the question, if you consider someone your best friend, would you give them your phone number on a Facebook post and say, please reach out and call me? So Sean Wright being a best friend of David Crowley is another far-fetched illusion. That is certainly not the case, and I think when David Crowley saw his inner circle as exposing this very inner circle of potential alleged friends as the very snakes within his project, that's when he decided to gain a new trustworthy group and he's working by himself essentially and wanted to get all new layer of friends that were trustworthy. He had some trust issues with these gentlemen, and it wasn't too good. Now back to Sean Wright. Sean Wright is the only person of the group was to have had allegedly crime scene photos on his cellular phone of the Crowley family. And when I say crime scene photos, these are not police crime scene photos. These were photos of the crime taken on a cell phone and later shared with others. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, why would Shawn Wright be in possession of any crime scene photos? I can't imagine a scenario where someone would forward him the actual police crime scene photos and then he would show them off to other people on his smartphone. The photos, alleged photos of these 5 or 6 crime scene photos from the crime scene that were not taken by crime scene detective photographers, but someone who was actually at the crime scene. Now, we know no one would be eligible to be at the crime scene once police got there. It's cordoned off, it's roped off, and the bodies are taken out. There's no chance for a civilian to have any kind of photographic options to take photos of the bodies. The one in particular is the one of a hand at the crime scene, a human adult hand. Now, once we hear this information of Shawn Wright having photos of a hand at the crime scene, you have to go back and ask yourself a question. Komel didn't have any hands. David only had one hand. That hand was the popular image we all saw on the crime scene photos, a mummified left hand that looked like leather. The image he was showing off of a human hand was not that hand. So if you do your critical thinking, narrow down how he would have in his possession a photo of a human hand at the crime scene, adult, not of the child. The only way you'd have the hand is if someone who took that photo was there at the crime scene. So, keep that in mind. My name is Dan Hennen. This is Crowley Case Updates. Getting a visual on November 7th, 2019. Thanks for listening, and please leave your comments below.